All right. Dr. Fondy, do you mind if I share my screen quickly? Thank you. All right. Well, thank you for coming, everyone. We've got a really exciting talk lined up today. So before we get started, I'm just going to get an old presentation going here. All right, so welcome to the GOME Wilderness Medicine Educational Lecture Series from November 14th. Before we get started, if you can, please go follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We give regular updates for our talks. And if you want to register for our talks via Zoom or view any archived lectures, you can see those at our website that you see there on the screen. So our mission is to create an educational platform where interested students and healthcare professionals can explore and interact with wilderness and emergency medicine. We also strive to showcase the diverse spheres in which physicians and healthcare professionals can make an impact and inspire others to think abstractly about the ways in which we can utilize our careers in healthcare and medicine. Finally, we strive to create an international community of wilderness medicine enthusiasts and experts committed to promoting a diverse and culturally competent environment. All right, so this is our 2021-2022 lineup. We have a lot of great talks. All of the ones you see that have already passed can be found on our website. Currently, we are having our talk on aviation medicine, which we're very excited about. And upcoming on December 1st, we have a wilderness medicine fellowship panel, a lecture on conservation medicine, and a lecture on ski medicine. So presenting today is Dr. Susan Fondy. Colonel Fondy graduated from civilian residency at the Medical College of Virginia Hospitals in 1997 and was commissioned as a direct accession active duty Army officer in 2004 in the wake of September 11th. Colonel Fondy deployed with the 10th Sustainment Brigade, 10th Mountain Division in 2006. She then attended the flight surgeon's course where she found her passion for aviation medicine. She served for 2 years with the 1st Battalion, 101st Combat Aviation Brigade, flying hundreds of combat medevac missions. She briefly served at the Womack Army Community Hospital in primary care pediatrics before deploying in the 21st Combat Support Hospital as the chief of primary care in 2010. Colonel Fondy then completed a second residency in aerospace medicine at the Naval Aeromedical Institute. She earned a master's of public health at the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston. Colonel Fondy's aerospace medicine career includes serving as the president of the Society of U.S. Army Flight Surgeons, the chair of the Education and Training Committee of the Aerospace Medical Association, and as a member at large on the Aerospace Medical Association Council. She holds the Master Flight Surgeon badge and also holds the Basic Space badge and Combat Action badge. All right, without further ado, thank you for coming.
Let me see, share screen. All right, so presumably y'all can see me and hear me. Throw me a thumbs up. Okay, awesome. So this is going to be spatial disorientation in the aviation environment. I have way more slides than I can possibly fit, so we'll just talk for a little while, and then when we come to a good stopping point, we'll stop. So we've got the mandatory disclaimer slide that the information I'm briefing is my opinion, not that of the U.S. Department of Defense, the U.S. Army, the Army National Guard, or basically anyone other than me. We've already gotten my background, blown a lot. So spatial disorientation is the #1 killer in aviation. It is basically loss of awareness of what your surroundings are, or loss of orientation relative to of the aircraft relative to the ground. It is particularly deadly because of some of the factors that we'll discuss going forward. So it's important to understand spatial orientation in order to understand spatial disorientation. So we'll talk about a few of these different words, terminology. So first, orientation. We all have a ton of information going into our brain all the time. And the brain is a magnificent organ that takes this vast amount of information and uses that information to look at the image that you see on the bottom and figure out which way is up, down, what your attitude must be. This is obviously a Blue Angel Navy, U.S. Navy Blue Angel pilot who is in some crazy attitude, but we can all look at that and figure out what that means. And of course, he or she can do that at the same time as they're flying and understand where the ground is and where the sky is relative to that, based on what we normally do to orient ourselves to the environment. We use 4 major systems to do that. One, auditory, is not generally relevant in the aviation environment because it's so noisy and the noise is coming from one location. We can't normally use auditory. So we talk mostly about visual, which is our primary method of orientation in the aviation environment, both in terms of object recognition and just visual guidance in terms of where you are, left, right, up, and down. We also use our vestibular system, which we'll talk about a good bit today. We have organs that in our vestibular system that detect rotation, and also those that detect forward momentum, acceleration, and deceleration. And finally, we have our tactile, our proprioceptive means of discovering where we are in space, the orientation of any given joint in your body, the pressure of your feet on the ground or of your seat on the seat, tells you a little bit about that. All of that information goes into your brain. Again, your brain does magnificent things with it and uses that to detect what direction you're going and which way up and down are. So all of this, basically a repeat, that tells us what our position is. So what direction are you going? Are you going east, west? Are you climbing? Are you descending? It also tells you whether you're going forward or backward. And sometimes it tells you that accurately, and other times your senses will be inaccurate in your perception. And that is where in the aviation environment we have issues. And then there's your attitude. Now, this is not a positive or negative attitude. This is your aircraft attitude, which is your aircraft's orientation relative to the ground. We can all look at that photograph and understand that this photograph is of a plane that is upside down, because we know that mountains don't come out of the sky. But if you're trying to figure that out and you're a pilot flying it, we also know that there's another aircraft that is also flying either right side down, upside down, or right side up, that is adjacent to that aircraft, because we know that the aircraft wouldn't be able to be photographed without it. So it tells us a lot about the particular environment. And if we don't have spatial orientation, then this is what can happen. Often it's a cognitive problem. It's a problem of processing that information, often because some information was missing and the remaining information was misinterpreted by the brain. So the question is, how does that happen? So you want to have full awareness of the big picture. So the first thing you see when you see this is that you see a couple of scuba divers who appear to be having a good time. But if you continue looking at the picture, you realize that these scuba divers have a bit of a problem. And if you look at it long enough, you realize that that problem might pose ongoing challenges to them. So you have to have the big picture. So it's the perception of all of the related elements that involve time and space, understanding the meaning and understanding what that means for your future motion through space, and what the inputs into the aircraft are going to do in terms of responding to that. So person, time, place, and mission all feed into your situational awareness, and they all can apply or cause problems with a lack of situational awareness. Any one of those things can damage your situational awareness, which damages your spatial orientation and can lead to spatial disorientation. So as we're getting started, three major types of spatial disorientation. We'll talk about all three of these, but type 1 is unrecognized, type 2 is recognized, type 3 is incapacitating. So what do we mean by these? So type 1, very, very dangerous. The individual's perception of the disorientation is none. They don't perceive or recognize that they have a problem. We say that they crash with a smile on their face. They think that they're doing the correct thing. They think they're flying straight and level when they're actually diving into the ground, as what happened with the crash of the helicopter that was carrying Kobe Bryant. Immediately before the crash, the pilot radioed that he had gone into the clouds and that he was climbing to 4,000 feet. And at the same time as he said that, his aircraft was diving towards the ground in a descending left bank. So that was unrecognized spatial disorientation. He had no idea that he was diving and banking left. And that led to a very last minute, as he saw the ground being unable to recover the aircraft. I have to learn to do the mouse the opposite direction. So recognized, you know that something's wrong. Either you're dizzy, you may or may not recognize the disorientation, but you recognize a conflict between what you're feeling and what the instruments are telling you. This is the best of the three. This is the one that pilots can see the instruments, realize that there is a problem. They know that they're not feeling right, and if they just fly the instruments, then they will be fine. Trust the instruments, don't trust yourself. And I have had this kind of disorientation once in Afghanistan. We were trying to get to a very injured person. We knew we were flying into a mountain pass that was just filled with clouds, and that we didn't have the right aircraft equipment to be able to see through the clouds. We were hoping we could kind of sneak under them to get there because the individual was really quite injured. And then very abruptly, we just disappeared into the clouds. And all of my references went away immediately. And I immediately had a sensation of kind of sliding sideways. And I had no idea which direction I was going in. And it was very, very dramatic, but I was totally aware that I had no idea which direction I was going. And fortunately, the pilots were experiencing the same thing, but they also had the instruments. And so they just got on their instruments and turned us around. And we called an aircraft that was a little farther away that had the right equipment to be able to fly into a cloud and not wind up with the same issues that we were having. And finally, there's incapacitating. Incapacitating, very dangerous. You are very, very aware that you have incapacitating spatial disorientation, but you may or may not be able to do anything about it. So if there is a second pilot who is able to take over, then really no issue. Usually this doesn't happen to two people at the same time. But if you are the only pilot, it can be devastating. So now we'll move on to how all of this works. So I understand that many of you are undergraduate students and medical students. So hopefully you are familiar with the vestibular system. You've already studied that. So I won't spend a lot of time talking about that, but that's a pretty picture. So functions of the vestibular system. The vestibular system helps us with balance and orientation. It helps us with visual tracking, allowing us to remain focused on an image while we're turning our head. It allows us to use reflex information. So think about a skateboarder throwing some kind of crazy trick. That's a function of the vestibular system. They're aware of their body's position in space, their rotation, and their angular acceleration. And all of that feeds into the brain really without conscious thought. And then we also use our vestibular system when we are walking to the bathroom at night. All of us are familiar with that. You can't really see, but you're aware that you are upright. You may not be aware that you're about to stub your toe on the corner of the couch, but that's a function of not being able to see. So that's what our vestibular system helps us with. So what does the vestibular system look like? We're going to talk about these in a lot greater detail, but of course we've got the semicircular canals. We've got the various parts of the semicircular canals that you've all studied in medical school, and then we'll talk about the cupula, the deflection of it in the ampulla, and then we'll also talk about the otolith organs that are in the losing words. That's awesome when you're speaking. So we'll get on with that. So we're going to start with the semicircular canals. So as you're aware, there are 3 of them. They're about at 90-degree angles to one another. And so they help the human body detect changes in speed and direction in pitch, roll, and yaw of the human. So all of us have the capability of pitching, rolling, and yawing just like an aircraft. And these canals help us with that. Then in the otolith organs, the otolith organ, which was the word I was searching for before, detects linear acceleration. So you've got the semicircular canals doing rotational acceleration, and then the otolith organs that are doing linear acceleration. So it detects changes in speed without changes in direction. And as you accelerate or decelerate, the otolith organs will let you know that you have accelerated or decelerated. So there are a number of illusions that can come from the vestibular systems. We refer collectively to the illusions of the semicircular canals as the somatogyral illusions, and those of the otolith organs as the somatogravic illusions. In general, while both can be dangerous, the somatogyral ones can be a little bit more dangerous, as you'll see when we discuss these illusions a little bit more. So starting with the semicircular canals and the somatogyral illusions. The somatogyral illusions have to do with the sense that you have of rotation. So the 3 that we're going to talk about are the leans, the graveyard spin, and the Coriolis effect. All 3 of those have the potential to be dangerous. The leans, generally the least dangerous of the 3. Graveyard spin and Coriolis can both be extremely dangerous if the pilot is not paying attention to the instruments. Coriolis is dangerous regardless of whether you're paying attention to the instruments or not. And you'll see why when we get to that. So there's your beautiful picture of a semicircular canal that you probably remember from your medical school classes with the cupula, and we'll be talking about its deflection within the ampulla, but that's going to be the really key thing here. So we've got the endolymph, and as we start rotating, the endolymph moves in the opposite direction of the rotation, and that's just by inertia. And as it does that, you get deflection of the cupula within the ampule, and that gives us the sensation of a turn. Our semicircular canals are very used to doing that, and we are used to detecting what that means. So when this happens, we are aware that because our endolymph is moving and it's deflecting the cupula, we're aware that we are actually turning, and we detect that. So what happens if you continue turning? So if you continue turning, eventually the endolymph stops moving. And when the endolymph stops moving, the cupula returns to its upright position, and it gives you the sensation that you are no longer turning. You are still turning at the same rate you were before. You are now no longer detecting it through your vestibular system. So that is where the problems begin. So let's take an example, and I'll walk you through this slide. On the top of the slide, we have what the aircraft is doing. From 0 to 100, the aircraft starts off flying straight and level, and then where you see it go up sharply and is at 100, it says right, that's when the aircraft is banking that entire time. And then the aircraft stops banking. So what is happening in the semicircular canal at the time that that is occurring? As you might expect, when we first start, the cupula is where one would expect it to be as you're flying straight and level. As you begin the roll, you immediately detect that you are rolling right by a deflection of the cupula. But then as you continue the roll, the cupula begins to return to normal, and your sensation of a roll starts to go away until eventually, still in the middle of the roll, your cupula is back to being erect. Then you roll out of your roll and back to straight and level, and immediately you have a very strong sensation that you are rolling to the left. If you maintain your straight and level, then eventually you will regain your orientation and stop feeling like you're rolling to the left. So both of those things have the potential, as you think about it, to be dangerous, because what the pilot is feeling and what the pilot is actually doing are different. So what happens when you have the leans? When you have the leans, let's start off with straight and level. You are actually flying straight and level, and you perceive that you are actually flying straight and level. So no conflict, no sensation, no problem. Oops. So when you go into the leans, you start off with a slow roll, and the slow roll is slow enough that you don't get enough of a deflection of the cupula to detect that you are actually rolling. So you are actually flying at an angle, but you perceive that you are still flying straight and level. This is one that generally the pilot will recognize that they are feeling that their instruments are not matching what they are actually feeling, and they'll be able to correct this. Generally, when you correct it, it makes you feel like you're going the opposite direction. So it takes experience and practice to make sure that when you have this perception, when you went back to straight and level, that you are actually banking the other direction, that you just ignore what your brain is telling you and go with what your instruments are telling you. So if the pilot does not pay attention to the instruments, then they will wind up leaning back in the other direction to compensate for the roll. They'll feel like they're doing the right thing. They'll be going back into a bank in the direction they were originally turning. So this is one of those, just listen to your instruments, you'll be fine. The graveyard spin and spiral is an extremely dangerous situation. So, and we'll walk through how this works in your brain as well. But this is one that, if unrecognized, can lead to the individual winding up pile driving into the ground. And once you get close enough to the ground, you can't pull up. It's becomes unrecoverable. Unfortunately, most of these people that this happens to will recognize that they are in a graveyard spin, but it will be a matter of seconds, and during a time where they recognize that it's unrecoverable and that this is going to end poorly. So how does this work? So once again, the spin begins, the cupula deflects, and the hair cells become stimulated because of the fluid in the semicircular canal. So after continuing to spin, the pilot has the sensation, as we discussed previously, that they are no longer spinning. At this point, they feel like they're flying straight and level, and need very much to pay attention to their instruments in order to recognize that this is not the case. Now, if they are to stop the spin, what happens then is that the fluid moves in the opposite direction. And when the fluid begins moving in the opposite direction, the pilot has a very strong sense that they're turning in the opposite direction, although they're actually flying straight and level. So if they attempt to correct that, they will go back into a spin. So, and this can happen with helicopters, it can happen with aircraft, fixed wing aircraft. So either can cause that. If the pilot does not stop the spin, or if they have if they stop the spin, have the sensation that they are still turning, or that they are now turning again, and they step back in, then they will step back into the spin. As an aircraft spins, by definition, it is going to need to lose altitude. The wings of an aircraft are optimized for straight and level flight. As you turn, as you bank, without putting in power, you're going to lose altitude. And as this happens, you're going to spin tighter and tighter until you wind up crashing into the ground. And at some point, as we discussed, it becomes unrecoverable. And that's backwards. Okay. So, and then finally, the Coriolis illusion, extremely deadly. And this is one of stimulating two of the semicircular canals at the same time. Generally, what happens is you've been in a prolonged turn. The example that's often used is a pilot is turning to come in for a landing, and they drop their pencil, and they tip their head down in a direction different from the direction that they're turning in, and immediately get an overpowering tumbling sensation. You cannot do anything about it when you have the Coriolis illusion. You are out of control of your body, and you feel like you are falling in every direction at once. It can be extremely deadly. As I mentioned earlier, if there are two pilots, then you have the opportunity to indicate to the other pilot that they must take the controls. In general, this, because it's a reaching for a pencil type phenomena, doesn't happen to both at the same time. So that situation can save the day. But if you are flying alone, your only hope is if you're on autopilot, or if you can somehow get the autopilot on until you get the sensation of tumbling gone, and keep your hands off of the instruments at the same time. Okay, so that was what I had on somatogyral illusions. So those are, as we talked about, the rotational illusions. So now we're going to move into the somatogravic illusions, and those are ones that have to do with your sense of linear motion, generally having to do with up and down. Break. Okay. So we talked about the otolith organs. Um, Basically, there are these little hair cells in there, uh, a a membrane over that, and acceleration, deceleration causes the hair cells to bend. And as those hair cells bend, that gives you information that your body is accelerating, either because the aircraft that you're in is accelerating or descending, or just gravity itself affects some of the vertically oriented um, otolith organs. So, and this is a better picture of sort of a cartoon of what this looks like. Um, as this membrane slides back and forth, you can see that those little hair cells will bend, and that connects to one of the vestibular nerves and indicates to the brain that you are accelerating, decelerating, or moving in some direction. So what does this look like when you're actually moving? So if you're still and not moving your head, as you probably are right now, then the hair cells stand right up. The gelatinous goo isn't moving, the membrane isn't moving, and so you're not getting any particular indication. As you flex your head forward, uh, everything slides that is not really nailed down by gravity, and the hair cells will bend, and that will give you an indication that you are bending your head forward. And then same with extending your neck back. Uh, I keep going backwards. Okay. Um, so the plane of the utricle is a little bit above, so like about a 30-degree angle up. And that has to do with the horizontal semicircular canal not being exactly horizontal. So the natural position of the otolith organs is 90 degrees from one another, but about 30 degrees off of the normal plane uh, of your vision. Okay, so how does this play in to the various illusions that you can have? So the first thing we're going to talk about is autorotation, but since y'all aren't flight surgeons, the flight surgeon students are the ones I normally give this lecture to. In the United States Army, we are a rotary wing primarily organization. So what is autorotation? Autorotation is what a helicopter does if it loses all of its engines. So most people think that if a helicopter loses all of its engines when it is flying, that is instant death for the entire crew. And that's not actually true. The only thing that's instant death for the entire crew in that regard is if the main rotor comes off. So if the engines stop functioning, much like a pinwheel, as the aircraft falls out of the sky, the main rotor will continue to turn. And the pilot can control that by controlling the control surfaces on the aircraft. So the aircraft will fall out of the sky, but it is under control, and the pilot has enough main rotor rotation to be able to settle the aircraft and land it safely on the ground. So in this case, what an autorotation feels like, having done many of them, we practice them on a regular basis. You're basically falling out of the sky under control. It feels a lot like an amusement park ride. So your acceleration is straight down, and the gravitational forces are straight down. And you have a little bit of upward sensation, but you feel like you are going down. Now, as that is happening, imagine what's happening within your otolith organs. Because of that 30-degree off-axis direction, it gives you a sensation that the nose of the aircraft is actually down as you're falling out of the sky, and you're moving forward, but you're moving down. So you get the feeling of being a little nosed over. That's problematic because if you feel like you're a little nosed over, then what are you going to do? You're going to pull up and try to get yourself back to nose level. And as you do that, you're actually going to counter the forces and get yourself to nose high at a time when you absolutely need all of the control surface of the main rotor in order to control your landing. So absolutely critical, again, you have to look at your instruments and understand that as you're auto-rotating, that this illusion is going to happen, particularly if you don't have good visual references. In general, if you have really good visual references, your visual references will counter this illusion. Same is true for the rest of the illusions that we're seeing here. And actually, even with the graveyard spin and spiral, if you've got great visual references, you're probably not going to graveyard spin and spiral because you're going to see that you're starting to spin. You're much less likely to get the leans as well. Coriolis can still happen on a beautiful, clear, sunny day if you reach for a pencil at the wrong time. So that can still happen. Here, if you've got lousy visual references, it's a gray, gloomy day. There's not really good distinction between the sky and the ground, or you're flying over water and everything sort of looks the same. That's where this sort of thing becomes really problematic. So that's auto-rotation, which is basically falling down. And I will eventually remember which direction to do this. So the elevator illusion, this is a vertical takeoff. Of course, being a helicopter, we can do that. And so this is the exact opposite of the auto-rotation. You're accelerating upward. And as you accelerate upward, gravity is pulling down. Your acceleration obviously is pushing up. And so your perception is going to be that you are a little bit nose high. And your desire then is going to be to counter by nosing the aircraft down. Again, problematic. Then a rolling takeoff. This is rapidly proceeding forward. This one is a particular issue for our fixed wing brethren, and carrier takeoffs, absolutely notorious for this acceleration issue. As they are rapidly accelerate forward on the carrier deck, they very quickly get the sensation that they are nose up. And so immediately upon taking off from the carrier, the pilot's desire is to nose the aircraft down, and leads to the loss of aircraft, the aircraft ditching into the ocean. Most of the militaries that use carriers have systems in place on the aircraft that prevent the pilot from actually accessing the instruments in the first few seconds of flight after a carrier launch, just for exactly that reason, preventing the pilot from mistakenly nosing the aircraft over into the water. And then finally, deceleration. That's more of a problem for helicopters because we can decelerate so dramatically and stay in the air. But again, you're going to get a perception of being nose down and need to pay attention to not countering that so that you don't wind up in too much of a nose up attitude. Okay, and G-excess is the one illusion that actually combines the two of them. I'm not going to go into great detail about it because it does get a little bit complex, but think of it in terms of having what your otolith's saying, what your semicircular canals are saying, and then as you rotate and turn your head at the same time, you can get into situations where you are getting the sensation of a very tremendous angle that is not actually there. It combining the two and causing your brain to not be able to understand what's going on. Particularly if you turn your head to face the direction that you are looking at as you are turning in that direction. Something that if the pilot is aware of, again they can counter it. But if they're not aware of it, then they can wind up feeling like they're underbanked, turning farther, and then eventually exceeding the control surfaces and sort of sliding sideways. There's a limit to how far you can tip an aircraft before it doesn't have the ability to stay in the air, because there's just not enough air pushing vertically on the aircraft, which is ultimately the goal of any aircraft, is for air to be pushing upward on the aircraft and keeping it in the sky. So, well, that went a little faster than I thought. I do have an entire other slide deck that is open to you, but let's stop for questions and see what y'all have at the moment.
All right, thank you so much. That was amazing. Yeah, if anyone has questions, feel free to unmute and ask them yourself or put them in the chat. All questions will be saved for your viewing later on the website.
I'll jump in and ask one of my own. How do you train pilots? Is it just a matter of understanding cognitively these are the things you will experience? Is that sufficient for making sure that you don't get confused and crash? Is it just look at your instruments, not what you feel?
So all of the above. The first thing that the pilot has to do is be able to fly on a clear day. So we start by training them in the middle of the day on a clear day when they can have visual references and get them comfortable with flying itself. As they progress, pilots can only fly under visual flight rules, which means that they have certain altitude, the ceiling, the clouds are above a certain level, and they have a certain number of miles of visibility, unless they have specific training in instruments. So a pilot is supposed to remain able to visually see the ground. Most of these illusions are not an issue if you can see the ground. But once you train then in instruments, and that you should be able to fly entirely inside the aircraft without ever looking outside at anything going on. Air traffic controllers will tell you that if there's traffic around, but you have to trust your instruments. When we see a lot of these crashes are when people are either trying to maintain visual flight rules when they really shouldn't be, as was the case with the Kobe Bryant crash. The pilot was trying to hide or stay under the clouds, and really should have filed an instrument flight plan. Didn't really have the weather to do what he was trying to do. He had Kobe was not pressuring him to hurry up or do anything dangerous, but the pilot was kind of pressuring himself because he wanted to get Kobe and his daughter to this game when he just didn't have the weather to do it. So part of it is, what is the safest alternative? And that's something that we discuss a lot in the military. The pilots don't make a decision in isolation. The pilots talk about it with each other, but they also talk about it with yours truly and the other backseaters. And we, as a crew of 4 or so people, will talk about what the alternatives are. And I have as much of a voice as the pilots do. If I'm not feeling comfortable with the situation, then the pilots either need to explain to me why I should be comfortable, or we will take the safest course of action, which is to return to a safe airport, or to not go on the flight at all, or whatever that safer course of action is. But aviation really is all about safety, and it's about having that training and the experience to trust the instruments and not trust yourself. Other questions? And I don't have the chat open, so if somebody pops something into the chat, please let me know.
I guess I have a question. As a flight surgeon, are you required to be able to operate an aircraft yourself?
In the US Army, the answer is no. In the Navy, they train them up to just before solo, I believe. In the Air Force, I believe they get some flight training as well. Many of the US Army flight surgeons have at least gone to an airport and puttered around on a Cessna a little bit, just to sort of get a sense, to be able to read the aviation maps and understand what air traffic control is saying, be able to have those conversations. So most of us at some point or another have done that, just to further our education, but that's kind of something you do on your own dime. And aerospace medicine, honestly, is it's a fascinating specialty, and it's something that I would think that many people in your organization would be interested in, just because we really do a lot of the wilderness and extreme environment type medicine. You will find aerospace medicine specialists everywhere. We're in Antarctica, we're at Mount Everest Base Camp, we're in the Aquarius habitat, we're on the International Space Station. So it's one of the routes to kind of the cool guy operational types of medicine. For those of us who our natural habitat is not a hospital or clinic, and we don't want it to be. I like practicing medicine. I would just rather be in a hangar doing that than in a hospital. And the concept of going to a hospital every single day just makes my toes curl. So, if you're in medical school and you are thinking, don't really love the hospital, really like being outdoors, really like action and adventure, but I like this medicine thing too, then there's a number of the environmental medicine and wilderness and aerospace is in that category as well. So something for your folks to think about. The biggest feeder systems are obviously in the military. So definitely a way to get into the residency program would be through the military. Can't tell you for other countries, but I'm sure that if you're in Australia, for example, then Dr. Christensen would be happy to push you in the right direction. I saw her floating around a minute ago, so I know she's out there somewhere. So, other questions?
Just sort of following up on that one, what would you say the percentage of your time is doing clerical side of medicine, the charting, the stuff we all dread, versus the sort of adventure and active portion?
Really, that depends on how much time you are spending in the clinic itself seeing patients. If you're spending a lot of time in the clinic, then obviously you're going to be doing a fair amount of the paperwork. In my case, in my career, I'm at the point now where I'm doing a more leadership-based job, and so I don't spend a ton of time in the clinic. I do spend a lot of time in my office on email, but as an aerospace medicine specialist, one of the advantages in the Army is that aerospace medicine specialists, regardless of our current duty assignment, are always required to maintain their flight hours. And because I'm always required to maintain my flight hours, that means that once a week or every other week or so, I sneak down to the local Army airfield and crew on a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter And the first time I came in, they kind of looked at me funny because most flight surgeons fly, but they're more like self-loading baggage or kind of a smart passenger. I've been around for long enough that I actually crew the helicopter. So I'm not really any different than any of the other backseaters. And so they've learned to expect, fuel checks from me, and that, and they also lose their minds because I always do the math in my head because that's just a doctor thing. But I'll clear the aircraft. I'll be outside with the fire extinguisher, and I'll let them know when the rotors are clear and stabilators clear and all of that kind of stuff. So it's just a fun other thing that I get to do that has its own level of relaxation because it's very different from what I do, and nobody else that I'm working with in my day-to-day job is involved in my flying part of the job. So I'm working with a whole different group of people who are seeing a whole different side of me. So what else you got?
Anyone else, feel free to unmute or put your question in the chat. We'll be happy to forward it on.
Open to all questions. It can be about the lecture. It can be about military medicine. It can be about aerospace medicine. It can be about being deployed to Afghanistan 4 frickin' times and flying hundreds of hours of combat medevac over the mountains of Afghanistan.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Fondy. Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. That was absolutely fantastic, and I think the students have had a real privilege to hear that talk today. I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned being able to crew the helicopter as well as be a flight surgeon. Did you have to do special training in order to develop those additional crew skills over and above your flight surgeon skill set?
It's more on the job training. So when that started, I was in the middle of my aerospace medicine residency, and the original unit I was flying with was a fixed wing unit from the US Navy, and I discovered that I do not have a fixed wing stomach. I have a rotary wing stomach, and every time I flew with the Navy, I was sick the whole time. So I started driving and flying with the Alabama National Guard. It was about 90 miles away, and I flew with them. And when I flew with them during the week, because they were a National Guard unit, they never had any backseaters available during the week. And so at first they were just kind of teaching me, first it was just stand outside the helicopter holding the fire extinguisher, and if the engine catches on fire, let us know. So it started out being just that, and I would stand outside on one side, and then eventually I started copying what the crew members did, and gradually over time I got better and better at it until now. When I'm flying with experienced crew members, I'm always asking them, what can I do different? What can I do better? And at first, when they first meet me, they're always intimidated to say anything because I'm a colonel. They're not used to that. But as they get to know me better, they realize that I'm very serious about improving. On my last assignment, I was assigned to the U.S. Army Aeromedical Research Lab, and we were assigned 3 pilots, and we didn't have any backseaters assigned to the lab except me. So when we were going to do some research on hoist operations, we didn't have any hoist operators. So what they did was they got the trainers from our DES, is kind of they're the head standardization for all of Army aviation, and they brought the DES backseat trainers over, and they trained me how to be a hoist operator. So I jokingly told people that I was the highest ranking hoist operator in the United States Army, which was probably entirely true, but it was necessary because they needed somebody in the lab that who could fly the helicopter as we were doing studies on the hoist environment. They needed somebody who had that capability, and so I trained on that and became certified, and that was, so that's always a fun thing to tell people. So I see a question in the chat, but I only see a little bit of it. So what does it say?
The question in full is biggest difference between military and civilian medicine. And second follow-up, is there any way to get experience in aerospace medicine through shadowing for medical school? If so, how would you recommend reaching out?
So great questions. First, the biggest difference between military and civilian medicine, I'd say that there are two. In military medicine, our patient population is generally younger and healthier. Just by definition, we don't have the super sick people. Sometimes the dependents or the retirees get some of those serious medical conditions, but most of our population is generally not super sick. So that's one of them. The other big difference is healthcare insurance. That is something that in the US we fight all the time on the civilian side. On the military side, it is beautiful. All of your patients have insurance. It's all the same insurance, so you don't have to memorize 6 or 7 different formularies because it's all one formulary. And you don't have to argue with a bunch of different insurance companies. Not really a lot of arguing going on between us and the military insurance company, which is called TRICARE. In general, we're able to give service members the healthcare that they need. So that's really, that aspect of it is something that I have appreciated for my career. Can you repeat the second question, please?
The second question was, is there any way to get experience in aerospace medicine through shadowing for medical school? If so, how would you recommend reaching out to people?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. It depends on what medical school you're going to as a starting point. But there's military aerospace medicine. There's also aerospace medicine in the civilian sector, so the FAA, NASA, and other governmental but non military organizations. So don't really know, but I can hook you up with some of the residency program directors who might have some ideas for how to do that. It may be a tough slide because there are a lot of people who want to do that. So it may wind up in the too hard to do category, but everything's a no until you ask.
And then another question here, how has being a woman in medicine as well as the military affected you? Did you face any difficulties? Is there any advice you'd give to other women looking for a career like yours?
Awesome question. I would say in medicine itself, I haven't experienced a whole lot of discrimination, just because there are a fair number of women in medicine. I have had a few situations where I've been mistaken for a nurse or something like that, and sometimes I just let it roll off, and sometimes I, pretend I didn't hear the person who's saying nurse, 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 and then act really surprised and like, oh, me? I'm Dr. Fondy. How can I help you? and and then they generally look pretty surprised. Being a woman in the military is definitely challenging. You're part of a smaller group of people to begin with. And then you're in a very highly testosterone-driven environment with people who prize masculinity. And so as a woman in the military, I'm constantly having to prove myself, constantly having to achieve more. One thing I've said more than once is if I see 2 people who are performing at exactly the same level, and one of them is white or male, and the other is, either a minority or female, chances are that the female or the minority is better, simply because they had to overcome more to get where they are. Now, that's not 100% true. It's not true across the board, but it's definitely something that you have to battle. I was introduced to that within the first 3 months that I was in the military. I joined the military. I knew I was going to Fort Drum to the 10th Mountain Division. And the first thing that the division surgeon wanted to do was didn't want me to go out to the infantry division, wanted me to be reassigned to the hospital. Then I went to basic training, and at the end of basic training, there's a week where all the doctors were put in a room together, and there were 10 of us, and they showed us this super cool video, and it was, people parachuting and rappelling and like doing all of this super awesome, amazing stuff. And I'm watching that and I'm like, that is the best thing ever. I want to do that. And when they finished showing us this amazing video, they're like, don't worry about where you're assigned right now. We can overcome that. But, this is recruiting to be a doctor in the US Army Special Forces who's interested. And my hand just flew up. I'm like totally down for this. And they turned and they're like, accept you. I was the only woman in the room. I was the only person who was interested. I was so pissed at the men who had this amazing opportunity to do this super cool stuff, and all they wanted to do was go hang out in a hospital, and I was being told that I couldn't do that. And then I arrived at my new unit. I was supposed to be an infantry brigade surgeon, and the brigade commander was not interested in having a woman as his brigade surgeon, even though a woman was allowed to fill that position. So I was moved over to a logistics brigade, and a male who was captain, who was one rank lower than me, was placed in the more prestigious infantry position. So that taught me very early on that as a woman, you just have to fight harder. And I refused to go away. That's part of the reason I became an aerospace medicine specialist, is because at the time, that was the coolest thing that a woman doctor could do. I couldn't be a ranger, I couldn't be in the special forces, but I could be an aerospace medicine specialist. So I did that. Fortunately, very good decision, and I have thoroughly enjoyed it. All right, what else?
Right, I think that's the limit of all of our questions and about our time designated for the lecture. But
Awesome.
That was a really incredible talk. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm always happy to come back, but it was a pleasure talking with you, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real honor, and I wish you the best. I am always happy to teach, coach, and mentor. So if anyone is looking for somebody to ask questions of, just reach out to the GOWME team, and they can hook you up with my email address, and we can link up, and happy to answer any questions that come into your mind later, because of course that's exactly what's going to happen.
Right, perfect. Yeah, if you guys are interested in watching this talk again or going back and catching other parts, it will be uploaded to our website shortly, and you can find it there.
Thank you again, Dr. Fondy. That was really interesting and exciting.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's nice to see you again, Rowena.
You too. Take care.
Take care.
All right, thank you.
I'm working on it.